Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Lazio Lounge. I'm Vittorio Campanile, with me again, Alistair McKenzie. Hello Alistair, how are you?
Hello, yes, I'm okay. I'm still shaking with the thrill of Lazio's new signing this week, so I suppose we've got to be happy, even if it's just Davide Di Gennaro who's come in. At least we're making some moves.
And he's going to be useful because he's going to be on the bench and come in when Inzaghi want to change something or give a little bit of rest to Lucas Leiva, I think. He's going to be his sub. So we always said that Lazio needed a sub in the midfielder. So that's the player they decided to buy.
I suppose the thing that's probably got most people down about this is the fact that he's come in because Danilo Cataldi's gone out. So you're losing a young Italy international Lazio fan, and you're bringing in a kind of approaching 30 former Milan player who's not really lit up Serie A before, I think it's safe to say. Do you expect that this is just... like you say, he's bringing in depth to the squads and he'll maybe play some Europa League games? Or do you think Inzaghi's spotted something that we haven't seen here and he's actually expecting him to become the next Regista of Lazio?
I think a bit of both. He's more a playmaker than probably other players in the squad. So I think if Inzaghi is going to change something, then Di Gennaro can become useful. I still remember when he started playing with Milan that he was highly considered, but then he wasn't able to prove it. He played well half the season with Cagliari, then problem with the renewal of contract forced him to sit on the bench more often. But again, I don't think he's going to be a player who's going to change the value of the team, but at depth in a team, in a position where Lazio was lacking, and especially this season is going to be very important. I think one of the plan of Inzaghi and Tare is to have 22 starters, which we didn't have last year. So this could be a good solution. Talking about Cataldi, I think we all know why Cataldi have left Lazio. He fall out with Simone Inzaghi. I've got the impression that even the last year of Pioli, he had problems. Probably the first season with Lazio where he played so well, he thought he was arrived. He was already a star and so deserved to play. And that influenced badly his performance. And he had problems since then. And I think Inzaghi didn't rate him that high and preferred Murgia. And that, again, created other problems. Cataldi, didn't feel he was... the same level of Murgia. He wanted to play more, and that's why he went to Genoa. He didn't perform, and now we're going to see what's going to happen next season for him.
Yeah, we've had a few comments about this week, so Adel Almaki has said that Di Gennaro's not bad for the bench. Cataldi has had his chance to prove himself, but he did almost nothing. At least Di Gennaro is better than him. Whereas Cristiano Bonomi has said that he's a good signing, but I'd have given a chance to Cataldi. Rami Algendi just says, first of all, who the hell is he in regards to Di Gennaro? So, mixed opinions. Ibrahim Alberti says he's a good player, he'll help us. Do you think, I think you make a good point there in terms of Cataldi. We do tend to get a bit overexcited perhaps about the idea of having, the next Lazio Bandiera. It's been so long since there's been a homegrown Lazio player who's lived up to their potential. So perhaps that overshadows Cataldi's ability a bit. It'll be very interesting to see how he does at Benevento. This is probably the critical season of his career, you might say, now to actually do well at Benevento.
But sorry, Al, didn't you think the same thing when he moved to Genoa? I thought, okay, he's going to a good club in Serie A, he's going to prove he's worthy. He didn't. And the other point is, who decided that Cataldi is going to be Lazio legend? We have Murgia, who was considered a top midfielder even in the Primavera. He can be Lazio, new Paolo Di Canio, etc. Lombardi. Now we have a lot of players coming from Primavera, and why, and this is something I don't get, why someone elected Cataldi to be the symbol of Lazio? Murgia, honestly, still have to grow, obviously, but I like his attitude much more than when Cataldi was playing. So,
yeah, I think in terms of why, it's probably more because of when he emerged. He's a little bit further ahead of those other guys, and Inzaghi obviously was superb last season in bringing through all these Primavera players who he worked with before. But at the time that Cataldi kind of emerged into the first team, it was when we weren't really bringing through that many youth players. So that's probably why we got more excited about him than the reaction you may have seen to players like Murgia. And in terms of the way I look at it, I'm just a little bit more cautious in my praise of guys like Murgia, because I'm wary of being let down. So I want to give him a bit longer. It's a promising first season, but you can't argue that Murgia's season he's just had has been a breakout season, an absolutely superb debut season in Serie A. He did well, but he's still got some way to go.
One of the problems in modern football is these youngsters, they do one match well and he's the new rising star. Instead, you have to see all the season, maybe even 2 seasons, before saying, okay, he's a good player, he really can perform at high level. The thing with Murgia, I don't know if you agree, is that he didn't have a breakout match, but he played consistently in at least 4 or 5 matches, and that's probably a good sign. It won't tell us that he's going to be a star, but I like that fact. Against Inter in Coppa Italia, he played really well and he started a match. He came in Torino Lazio, he scored and he played well. There are another 4 or 5 matches where he played well. Again, there are like Lazio Napoli, if I'm not wrong, where he didn't perform as expected. But you're going to have to allow the youngster to have up and downs, at least in the first 2-3 years of his career, before hoping that he perform always at the same level.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just looking comfortable is an underrated skill, isn't it? I think if you manage, and it's something I've said about Strakosha before as well, is that yes, he's made a few mistakes, but most of all, the most encouraging thing about him has been coming into the team and looking like he belongs there, and that must be very hard as a central midfielder in Serie A. So Murgia is promising. Just to bring this conversation back to Di Gennaro, we did have a couple of people just wanting some information. Widiari said he wants to ask us about him. I mean, I'm not going to be claimed to be an expert on Di Gennaro, but in basic terms, he's I suppose a kind of a left-footed creative player. I mean, he takes a lot of set pieces, corners, free kicks. He came in and he said he's inspired by Andrea Pirlo. So, and then like you said, when he was young, he did have a big future ahead of him. I mean, he played for Italy at almost every youth level, I think, up to the under-21s, and then kind of stalled. So there is talent there, Vittorio. He's not just an extra body. You'd say there is something there.
Absolutely. And the thing I like is he came and said, Lazio is my big chance. I want to give everything. And it looks like this is a little bit the theme of Lazio transfer market. Marusic is coming to prove he can play this level. Lucas Leiva is a player who didn't play a lot last season, who's coming to prove he's able to play at a certain level. And this is the biggest chance Di Gennaro had in the last 10 years, probably. So it's good when you get this player that has talent. They didn't show it, especially Di Gennaro, but have talent and know this is probably going to be the last chance to prove it at a high level. So it's going to be interesting to see how it performs. The other good thing is he arrived a little bit late, but not that late. We are still in July, so he still have time to get used to the training, to the tactics before the season starts. For example, Luis Alberto, and the coach said it during this month, struggled even because he arrived at the end of August and didn't have time to get used to the training, the tactics, etc., that the season already started. So this is going to help Di Gennaro in a certain way, and then he's have to prove in the pitch that he's able to play for Lazio.
Yeah, and like you say, he'll be driven, and that's a model that worked for us in the market last season. I mean, if you look at where Ciro Immobile was when he came into the club, mentioned this before, but having disappointed so much in Germany and in Spain, he came into the club really trying to prove a point, didn't he? So it's quite a clever strategy in the market to find these guys whose, their mentality is in the right place, I suppose.
Absolutely, and there was a very nice interview with Immobile in the Corriere dello Sport where he said, I'll stay with Lazio till they want me because I like playing here, I like the fans, and probably he has a little bit of gratitude because Lazio brought him back to his high level, trust him where not a lot of team would have put a lot of money on him, and that's good because even if Immobile will never say he's a Lazio fan or when he was a kid he was a Lazio fan, we all know that, but he put 100% every time on the pitch and fan loves it. Alasdair doesn't only ruin my weekends in the last couple of months, but sometimes does something very interesting. Alasdair, do you want to talk about the new thing you came out, and who do we have as a guest today?
Yeah, very occasionally managed to get something right. Well, we've followed on from last week's conversation really about Lucas Leiva arriving at Lazio and people's thoughts about it, and we've got a special guest this week who's Neil Atkinson from the Anfield Wrap, which is a fantastic Liverpool podcast, award-winning Liverpool podcast. So welcome, Neil, to the show.
Hello, gentlemen. How are we?
Doing very well. Thanks very much for joining us. I mean, it sounds like from what I've seen on Twitter, on your own Twitter account of the Anfield Wrap, the exit of Lucas Leiva is something that a lot of Liverpool fans are quite sad about. He's become a very popular figure over at Anfield. Is that right?
Yeah, very much so. He's his entire sort of Liverpool career is this really rather strange thing in that he ends up racking up over 300 games for Liverpool, but he's been unfortunate with his timing on a couple of occasions, but he's never ever shirked any aspect of the responsibility. So I think he arrived as being billed as a box-to-box midfielder from Brazil, and then he was quite quickly by Rafa Benitez. Benitez clearly wanted to use him more as a deeper lying centre midfielder, and pretty much from minute one he wanted to do that with him. Really, he never really got the opportunity to be the player he'd been at Gremio, and that meant a few Liverpool supporters just weren't quite sure what to make of him. And even he came on for Steven Gerrard in a Merseyside derby once, and he has a shot in the last minute of the game, and it's going into the top corner, and Phil Neville handles it, and this is in his first season, so it doesn't go in, and then Dirk Kuyt scores the penalty, and Liverpool win the game 2-1. And little things like that right the way through his Liverpool career have sort of pockmarked what could have been, a really quite special Liverpool career. But throughout all of that, Lucas's personality and his commitment to the team and also to the city has shone through. So he's got this sort of. There's very few. There's cult heroes at every club, but there's very few sort of Liverpool cult heroes where the player, as I say, stays for 10 years without there being a long list of silverware, given Liverpool's sort of fantastic history. So it's quite a strange sort of thing for Liverpool supporters, this, and some aren't quite sure what to make of it. But Lucas has played in some and been a very important player in some very good Liverpool teams and very good Liverpool squads. And I think Lazio have got themselves, firstly, a top professional, but secondly, a footballer who I think needs to spend the last 2 or 3 years of his career playing regular first-team football.
Yeah, I think Well, for me anyway, like you say, because he's been at Liverpool for so long, 10 years, I've got so used to the sight of him on Match of the Day and so on that I was amazed to find out he's actually only 30 still. But do you think that he's, given that he's struggled to get as much game time and so on, has he declined much as a player in recent seasons, would you say? Is that one of the reasons he's left?
No, well, I think he's only 30. He looks a little bit older. He comes across a little bit older. He had an injury in 2010 when Roy Hodgson was erroneously made Liverpool manager. The then awful Liverpool managing director gave Hodgson a list of players to get rid of, and one of them was Lucas Leiva. Because this man was terrible. But Hodgson, to his credit, and there's very few things you can credit Hodgson for whilst he was at Liverpool, decided that he could do something with Lucas and used him. And it was in about 2010. It was the right age for Lucas. He was 23 at the time, and he was one of the few bright spots from Hodgson's time. Then Dalglish took over, and Dalglish really got Lucas playing. And Lucas gave an interview to the Anfield Wrap where he said the most he enjoyed his football was under Dalglish. And at the start of the following season, Lucas was in imperious form. He was looking like one of the best centre midfielders in England. And he played a Saturday game against Manchester City, and then Liverpool had a League Cup game against Chelsea on the Tuesday. And supposedly Lucas insisted on playing because he was, that day he bossed Yaya Toure in the middle of the park, and that was when Toure was a better player than he is now. And Lucas insisted on playing, and then he got a very, very, very bad injury that kept him out for the rest of the season. And then at the start of the 2012 season, Brendan Rodgers came in, and Brendan Rodgers played him, and Rodgers played him in his first game, and on his first game back, Lucas got another bad injury. And my point here is that Lucas has declined as a player from before these injuries to what he is now. But I don't particularly think he's declined particularly since, let's say, 2013 to 2017. So he's not the footballer that he could have been, and he's not the footballer that he was in 2012. But he is, I would argue he's still the footballer that he was in 2014. And actually, you can say he didn't play much for Liverpool last season. He got 31 appearances. And towards the end of the season, when we were going for the Champions League places, he played a number of games and he became increasingly important, especially away from home and especially against more physical sides. So, for instance, he also played very well in the Merseyside derby towards the end of the season. He played away at Watford when Liverpool very much needed a win the first week of May, and he plays the 90 minutes in that game. So whilst he is a squad player and has been a squad player at Liverpool, he hasn't just been a bench player. He hasn't been coming on and getting 10 minutes here and there. He has been, relatively important within that squad, and that squad last season got 76 points. So I think that, as I say, I think Lazio are getting a very good holding midfielder who can also play a bit at centre-half if they need it.
Neil, do you think he's coming to Rome with a chip on his shoulder to prove, he's still a quality player?
Oh, very much so, yeah. I think he'll be coming at... I don't think he would have gone, and it's important this. Him and his family are really well settled in the northwest of England. Like, as an example, Lucas has been, very few Brazilians were successful in English football before Lucas. And he very much, he runs the social set, he runs the barbecues, he puts the nights on for them. I've got a friend who supplied the wine for a gathering where, for instance, Fernandinho was at Manchester City. My point here is that he's very settled as a person in Liverpool, and he could have stayed and seen his contract out for another season at Anfield. So if he's going to Lazio, he's going to prove something from a footballing perspective, to play his games, to play his football. That's why he's going. He's not going because it's a little bit of money. I even would suspect he's possibly took a pay cut to go, to be honest with you, because his Liverpool contract was pretty significant. So he's got 1 year left on that Liverpool deal, and he could just sit there and, he's friends with Coutinho and Firmino, and he'd still pick up his 20 games. Quite comfortably at least, because players get injured and Liverpool have got more games this season. He's still seen as a senior professional. It's noticeable with Jurgen Klopp. Firstly, Klopp said there was a tear in the eye when he decided to go. But in last season's pre-season, when Lucas wasn't featuring, he would sit on the bench with the coaching staff because his football mind is respected. So he's respected at Liverpool. So if he's gone to Lazio because he has to prove something as a professional footballer, and he wants to play football, and he wants to play football at the highest level he can and as regularly as he can, and starting as many games as he can. So yeah, I think Lazio are getting a footballer who firstly has got a great brain, but who secondly is very, very focused on proving himself and will want to impress the fans in Rome in the same way that he impressed the fans in Liverpool.
Last question for me is, do you think he can be a playmaker, or do you think he is now more a defense midfielder?
He's more of a defensive midfielder, but he's very good still at playing a vertical 20 yards pass. And if I was looking to use him, I'd be using him to break up attacks, to pick the ball up, but then look to shift it sort of 20, 25 yards forward. I think that and I think this is the case with all footballers, I think you have to encourage certainly a certain type of midfielder. I think, they need to be encouraged not to just play the safe ball, not to play sideways, not to pick it up and look for the full back in wide areas when they've won it back. And all footballers who play that sort of deeper lying role, they can fall into doing that all the time. We know that. We've all watched enough football. But I think if Lucas is given options in front of him and is encouraged to try and pick them out, then he can actually set a little bit of the tempo in an attacking sense. He's not going to be going past anyone. He's not going to be I'd be surprised if he's breaking third man runs into the box to finish off a flowing counter attack. But what he can do is he can get you the ball from say the halfway line into the feet of the sort of the advanced midfield playmaker. He can move aside 20, 25 yards up the pitch. He can provide a bit of impetus, but he can play the pass that leads to the goal. But he'll need some encouragement, and he'll need to have the right players around him to do that, and not to play it a little bit safe. And I'm sure Lazio have got those players, and I'm sure they've got that plan in mind for him.
Well, I think one of the things people have picked up on really in terms of being a negative point of him coming in is just because he's replaced the captain Lucas Leiva, who's performed that kind of deep playmaker role for us. Something I wanted to pick up on that you've just mentioned there is that the fact he's also played in defence before. Do you think there's a chance the Lazio coach Simone Inzaghi is very much insisting on using a 3-5-2 for the season ahead? Do you think that Lucas would be able to fit into a three-man defence? Is that something that's ever been tried while at Liverpool at all?
I think I think when Lucas has played as the deepest line midfielder, Liverpool have done a bit more of splitting the centre backs and having that deep line player sort of drop in. So, for instance, when Jordan Henderson is the deepest line Liverpool midfielder, he very much plays in front of the centre backs because he's got the ability to track left and right and to go up and down. He's very, very mobile. Lucas isn't as mobile. So when he has played there, you have seen the centre half splitting him go a little bit deeper. And I think another thing to point out is that for a man of his size and in general for a midfielder, he's excellent in the air defensively. He's very, very, very good at positioning himself and either getting in front of a big striker and picking off the ball in front of them. And Rafa Benitez was using him for that, going right the way back to 2008 when we come up against more physical opposition in midfield, but also he's shown he can do it at centre back. My worry with him at centre back, and you saw it last season when, for instance, we went up. So Liverpool played, I think we played Tottenham and then we played Leicester. And against Tottenham, Harry Kane, who went on to be the top scorer in the English League last season, Lucas dealt with Harry Kane. Absolutely had him in his pocket all game. It was a Rolls-Royce centre-half performance from him, really. So Kane was trying to play on him, thought he'd get something out of him. And his combination of his anticipation and his tenaciousness and the fact that he has got a fair bit of physical presence meant that Kane just found it quite difficult and got no change. The week after, Liverpool went to Leicester, and twice in quick succession, and one of them led to a goal. Jamie Vardy ran off the back of Lucas, and he just took him out the game because he doesn't have that sort of recovery pace. He has no real pace on the turn. So my answer to your question as to whether or not you might be thinking of using him there is yes, but that would to a certain extent depend on how high the line is and what the nature of the opposition possibly is. Because what you don't want, obviously, is to have a centre-back who can just be targeted in terms of his pace on the turn. And, that would worry me. And as I say, Lucas was able to deal with the best centre-forward in England last season in Harry Kane, but he wasn't able to deal with the player who had been the best centre-forward in England the season before in Jamie Vardy. And as I say, they were back-to-back weeks, back-to-back games. He had the same personnel around him. And yet one week he came out very much on top, and the next week he came off very much second best.
I've just got one final question for you, Neil, as well, which is, sorry if this is a bit of a curveball, but it's just come to mind that another player in the Lazio squad at the moment you might have opinions on, which is Luis Alberto, who arrived at Lazio last summer, struggled to really get much time in the team, to be honest, but he's another ex-Liverpool player, and I know it didn't really work out for him with you either. So what kind of went wrong for him at Liverpool, and what did you see from him while he was there?
He's so slow, it's ridiculous. That's what went wrong for him at Liverpool. Apart from that, the bits and pieces that you saw, I liked him. He's got a clear footballing brain. I suspect one of the issues that he had at Liverpool was what was going on the training pitch. That was the season he came in, was the season 13-14 under Brendan Rodgers, when Liverpool got 84 points and were unfortunate not to win the league. They probably played the best football in the division that season, but it just didn't quite come off. What happened though throughout the season, and one of the reasons why maybe it didn't quite come off, was Brendan Rodgers was whittling his squad down in terms of who he liked and who he wanted to work with as the season wore on. So Luis Alberto became a pretty early casualty of that process. So by the time Liverpool sort of finished the season, there's probably 14 players you're able to list who Rodgers trusts and is prepared to give genuine game time to, and Alberto wasn't one of them. But I think a massive part of that was the lack of pace. And Alberto, to me, I find him quite a strange footballer. He looks technically sharp. His numbers are pretty impressive in terms of both goals and assists at certain clubs he's been at. But you never feel as though he's going to be able to turn that into success at an elite club. And Lazio are a very, very good club and will want to be an elite club. And I would just Alberto, to me, this is an inaccurate comparison, but I hope the listeners get the general point. He's sort of a bit like a low rent Juan Roman Riquelme, in that you sort of need to build. I think he'd look great at say, probably the best club at Serie B, where they build the entire side around him. I think he could look great. But if he's going to be part of a side which has got 3 or 4 different points of attack, 3 or 4 different focuses that wants to be able to counter-attack quickly, then I think he'll find it difficult. And that's just not just a Lazio thing, but I think that's sort of at any level of football. I think as soon as it becomes, as soon as you can't sort of mitigate for his weaknesses, and very good sides can't, and sides that want to be very good sides can't, then you end up in a situation where it's actually difficult to find a place for him in the 11, despite the fact that he cuts off space very well. He's good at passing lanes. He's got a nice eye for a pass himself, and he can stick it in the back of the net.
I think one of the problem with Luis Alberto is the confidence. I think he never really got into Premier League football, and the fact that when he went on loan in Spain, he played very well is because he knew the Liga, he knew the players' style, etc.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why he struggled, especially the first 6 months in Italy, because he had to settle. As you were saying, he wasn't the first choice of Lazio, obviously, and he suffered that, I thought, even in the training. And then slowly he gained the confidence of the manager. He felt, the team could help him and start performing well. So, again, I don't think he's going to be the first choice for Lazio this season. He's going to have more time because there's the Europe League as well. But he has talent. He has to gain confidence when he's playing and when he's training.
I think that's all very fair.
And he's actually being used in pre-season at the moment as a kind of deep-lying playmaker in a central midfield, and we're still not so sure if that's something that's going to happen long-term or not. But it's quite interesting to hear what you say, Neil, about he's got a good brain and good technical skills, but no pace. So it sounds like that's a role that perhaps could actually suit him better. I don't know if you agree with that.
But Neil, sorry, you said Lucas as well is not very fast. So do you think they could play together in the midfield?
Quite possibly, if you to play something that looked a bit like a 4-2-3-1, they could mitigate for one another's weaknesses. But I would worry about sort of pacing behind them and pace around them for both of Lucas, less so, in terms of the fact that Lucas has got. He's now got 4 or 5 years' experience since the 2 injuries I mentioned before, of not having the sort of pace he could do with. So he knows how to use his brain to get himself around the pitch to anticipate. He had a great game in the Merseyside derby where, he must have won the ball back 8 or 9 times over the course of the 90 minutes, and he tended to do so by simply being 1 yard in the head faster than his Evertonian opposite number. So, I think Lucas can mitigate for that whilst the game's in front of him. But my worry with a lot of footballers, and we've all seen enough football to see it happen. My worry with a lot of footballers is just what happens when things start to happen behind them, and they've got to have genuine pace on the turn.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, Neil. That's really interesting stuff. Quite enlightening as well in terms of getting more of an idea of what we've got our hands on here, because it's always good to get expert opinion from the other side.
Look after him.
Yeah, hopefully some Liverpool fans start to watch Lazio and take an interest now.
I will have my eye on a Lazio game, no doubt about that.
Great, well, that's the Anfield Wrap, at the Anfield Wrap on Twitter. Fantastic show, so all our listeners have a listen to them at some point as well. And thanks so much, Neil, for coming on the show.
Thanks, gents. Enjoy the rest of the show.
Thanks, Neil, and thanks especially for the Champions League final against Roma. Much appreciated. Much appreciated.
Right.
Bye.
I'll see you later on, gents. Let us know if you ever need anything else, okay?
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Cheers. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Well, fantastic again to get some more insight on Lucas, who's obviously been the standout transfer, I suppose, of the summer so far. We're going to get on to the questions we've received at this point, and I suppose transfers are quite a good place to start because we've had a few of these, Vittorio. I mean, Keita, we're sick of him now, but he's again been the man in the headlines really this week. A friendly against Triestina, he was back on Twitter before the game saying he was ready to show how professional he is, but then he had been dropped from the squad. But would you not say, Vittorio, that he's not showing how professional he is if his reaction to that is to go onto Twitter?
And very professional to arrive late to the training the day after the day off, right? He arrived 1 hour and 30 minutes later to the hotel. Very professional. You cannot be professional only when you want to. You have to be professional all the time. As you were saying, this story is getting annoying. The new thing that surprised me a little bit is yesterday Lotito arrived to Oronzo and he talked a lot like he usually do. And every time he talks, I'm concerned. I really think he should hire a PR to help him. But the most interesting or concerning thing he said about Keita is when they asked, did you offer him a renewal of contract? And he said, I didn't do nothing. It's not my job. But he didn't say that Tare or someone else of the team offered Keita a new contract. He talked only about the offer the club received to sell Keita. And this, I don't know if you agree, surprised me a little bit. I thought Lazio should have done everything possible to keep Keita instead of shipping to the team that offers more money. They already give up on him.
It's crazy, but I mean, again, you wonder how much of it is personal relationships getting in the way of good business, I suppose, and that from a fan's perspective, you can see what Keita offers and you can see how important he would be for this team next season if he stayed in it, especially now that he's shown his versatility to play in a new role in the 3-5-2 as well and been very successful there. But yeah, I agree. I think Lazio should be doing everything to keep him at the club and to keep him happy. But I don't know, after this week, I think this whole soap opera has dominated the summer far too much. And look, it's almost the end of July now. We need to move on. And that's why I said last week I was actually relieved Lucas Bailey had left. Not because I was happy to see him leave as a player, but just so we can actually focus on what's going to be happening for the next season. And Lazio managers, Lazio coaches struggle quite often in their second season, and a lot of that has to be because of dramas like this dominating when they're trying to actually put a team together. Ibrahim Albetti has asked us, will we need to bring in a new striker, or are we going to use Anderson as a new striker? And at the moment, Anderson's the one who's been used alongside Immobile, but you wonder if that's because there's no one else really to play in that role. So there will need to be another player coming in, and by that point that we're looking in the market, everyone's already done their business, haven't they? So there's very few options you've got left that Lazio can afford and that are the quality that we're going to need if Keita, or when Keita does go.
Well, there was another interview at Lazio Channel this time, very interesting, with Farris, that is the second coach of Inzaghi. and they said that they analyze, they study better Felipe Anderson, and they said that probably playing near Immobile in the 3-5-2 is his best position. So they are trying to make him play there and see how things goes. They believe he's gonna play better, and I believe that probably playing near the box, Anderson could be another player. And Lotito said yesterday the top priority is a striker. Now, he didn't specify if it's a player who's going to come in and give a little bit of rest to Immobile, or is a player who's going to play near Immobile. So we're going to see. But he said absolutely top priority now for Lazio is buying a striker. So I'm curious. And the thing is, as you said, that a lot of players have already settled, but it's even true that there are players who weren't in the market before that now probably are, because the club bought other players, so they don't have any more time to play, and so they're probably looking to move and find another team.
Yeah, I think at this point the question is it going to be Luis Saha or is it going to be Helder Postiga? It'll be one or the other. I'm going to move on to another question we've had. This it's going to make me break down into tears at some point. Gerkstav has said, is there any possibility, with a generous enough offer, that Lazio will let Sergej Milinkovic-Savic go to another club? I suppose this is on the back of even more reports this week about, big offers coming in. We have answered this question before, and I don't think my answer has really changed. I think now that he's signed a new contract with the club, it would take something absolutely spectacular to bring him away. If Liverpool's interest was real and they offered, Premier League money, 50-60 million pounds, then they'd probably have a look at it. But I'd be absolutely astonished if he went to Juventus or Inter.
Lotito said again that he received an offer of 40 million euros and he refused for Milinkovic. And the player is happy. I don't know if you thought the same thing. It's the first time an agent of a Lazio player says, no, he's not going to leave Lazio, he's happy, he wants to win something before leaving the club. I don't remember a Keita agent or Biglia agent say something like that, honestly.
I think the difference with Milinkovic-Savic is that he can actually recognise that Lazio is the right place for him to be at the moment in terms of his career development in a way that Keita can. I mean, Keita, in my opinion, would be best served in terms of his development to be at the club for another year, but he can't recognise that, or the people around him, like you've said before, his entourage aren't exactly the best advisors for him, and they just want the money and the big move. But Milinkovic-Savic comes across as being a bit different. He knows this team's going to be built around him to some extent next season. He's going to get a lot of game time, he's going to get European football, and he's already well regarded, so there's going to be a lot of people watching him. So if he does decide he wants to leave the club, I think it wouldn't be until next summer at least.
Totally agree.
Let's move on away from the Mercato nightmare because we've had a few questions this week about tactics. So something else for us to talk about. We have a question. Well, we had a question from Omar Baj about Inzaghi using Lucas Leiva as a defensive player or a regista, which thankfully Neil Atkinson's managed to answer for us. So we've got one from Gerkstav again, who's saying it'd be nice to have a discussion on the manager's preferred and likely tactics for the upcoming season. So a kind of general one, but it does look, Vittorio, now very much that the 3-5-2 is going to be the starting tactic. One thing I found quite interesting in the last week was Wesley Hoot, who was interviewed and basically said that the team last season switched between 3-2 and 4-3-3, actually had a detrimental effect on how many goals they concede. And he seemed to think that the idea that they're sticking to one system is going to help them defensively a lot, which is quite interesting. I mean, it seemed quite good thing last season that we were capable of using two formations from one game to the next. So it's quite interesting to have someone from the inside not necessarily criticise that, but point out that from a defensive perspective, it's not too easy going from a back three to a back four.
I think Hurt is absolutely right. Thinking about the defense, you have to change completely movement, and so if you're changing tactics, you can forget about that move or don't think about it because you're used to play 4 defender and now you're 3 and you forgot. The classic example could be the Coppa Italia final when Lulic didn't make the movement and now I don't remember who scored the goal, but Juventus striker was all alone in the box. And again, Faris in the interview said that they have studied a lot the movement in the defensive movement in the 3-5-2. They believe, talking with the players, especially the defense, that this tactics will allow Lazio to concede less goal. So they study a lot of movements. And again, it's good to have players, especially forwards or midfielders, that can change tactics. But for them, it's much more easier. The problem is in defense, where you have to make all the movements that change completely if you're defending with 4 and instead of 3. So it's not very easy. And with the 3-5-2, Hurt can become even more useful as a playmaker, especially if Lucas Leiva playing. He can become, let's say, the Bonucci of Lazio, the playmaker playing from behind. And I think that could be an interesting move.
Yeah, I think he's going to have a big role to play this season, isn't he, within a back three. But it's quite interesting that last season Inzaghi tended to drop him from that back three for the kind of important games. So it'll be interesting to see if he's managed to convince him a bit more. The more important games towards the tail end of the season, Hook tended to drop out to the side. Maybe it's a lack of pace or he just doesn't think he understands the role quite so well.
Probably he was convinced Basto was a better player for playing in a defense, 3 defense, even because I think he was coming from that type of football. So,
in order to just answer that question, I think very much the likely tactics for this season are 3-5-2. I mean, every single day, basically, you when you look at what Lazio are doing at Auronzo, it's basically training in the 3-5-2. Every single friendly game so far has been 3-5-2. The games where the inter-squad games are using 3-man defences. So it looks like that's the way it's going to go. And I think we'll see less rotation. Well, from what we've seen so far, I'd expect less rotation than what we saw last season.
I think the difference will be in front. I already saw in the other friendly Lazio switching to a 3-4-3 or a 3-4-1-2. So probably they're going to stick with the 3 defense, but change things in midfield and above. So I think that could be the tactics Lazio's going to play. And again, if you think about the defense movement, it doesn't change that much if you play 3-5-2 or 3-4-2. 3-4-3, obviously, we're not playing 10 men. But
you shouldn't be a manager, Vittorio, if you're going to play 3-4-2.
But talking about defense movement, there won't be any changement, so that will help the defenders.
I think that there's a chance, like you say, 3-4-3. There's a chance Inzaghi might have looked at the way that Antonio Conte lined up his Chelsea team last season and think, actually, that makes a lot of sense for this Lazio team. In terms of the talents we have available in the squad, I think that's actually a system that would suit this Lazio team quite well. A back 3, we've got decent options. Then 2 kind of within the midfield four, the wingers would be the defensive wingers, which was Moses and Alonso for Chelsea, but we very much have Basta, Maricic, Lukaku, then one defensive midfielder, one more creative midfielder. But I mean, that would be fantastic if we could have a front three with Keita in it. I think that's something I'd quite like to see them have a look at is playing that Conte style 3-4-3 system, just because it seems to suit the players we've got available to us quite well. I don't know if you agree.
3-4-1-2 could be the better option, with Luis Alberto or Milinkovic-Savic playing just behind the two strikers. That in that case could be Immobile and Felipe Anderson. Probably that suits even better, considering that Keita probably won't stay.
Well, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they do. I think you make a good point there, though, that the three-man defence looks like it's not going to change, but what we could see changes further up the other end of the pitch. Another question we've had is from Sleepy E, who's asked us to talk about Di Gennaro, which we've done, and then he said perhaps discuss the ideal starting 11 along with tactics. So if we are going to go with the 3-5-2 and give our ideal starting 11s, I suppose it's not too difficult to do. I don't think at this stage it seems relatively clear in my eyes. I mean, if we're going through the team, Strakosha at the moment has to be the number one, I suppose. Tell me if you disagree with any of this. In the back three, I suppose there's a bit more room for rotation, but you'd probably say the one we've seen most often before has been with Hoot, De Vrij, and Wallace or Bastos. I'm not too sure, actually.
I think there's going to be a rotation there. Maybe Radu would be part of it as well.
Yeah. And on the back of what Neil said, it would be quite interesting to see how much, or if at all, Inzaghi does experiment with putting Lucas Leiva into that for perhaps games against, your Benevento or your smaller clubs in the league, just to experiment with it a little bit. I think our strongest midfield now, and this is going to get me onto something else actually, but I think our strongest midfield now is with Lucas, Sergei and Parolo, and then on either side having Basta and Lukaku, and then with Felipe Anderson and Immobile up front.
I would put Marusic instead of Basta. I think in a 3-5-2 you need someone who push a little bit more, otherwise you're not going to be creating too many chances.
Yeah, I mean, I say Basta at the moment just because I've not seen enough of Marusic, I suppose, to be able to say for sure, but I wouldn't be surprised, if that was a change that was made. But that comes back to the point I was trying to make last week about Senad Lulic, and now he's been given the captaincy, but he doesn't get in that team for me. I understand he'll still play a lot of games because he's so versatile. He'll be able to play anywhere in that midfield, more or less, and if there is a front three, he can also be pushed up there or back, God forbid, back to left back at some point as well. His reaction to the being given the captaincy was quite interesting, because he basically has said, Radu was offered the captaincy, he didn't want it, and nothing's really changed for him because there are a number of leaders in the dressing room. There are guys like him, Ciro Immobile, Marco Parolo, Stefan Radu, and nothing's really changed. He has the armband, but those are always going to be, the senatori of the team, and so nothing's really changed in his eyes.
Yeah, and this tells you even how important Biglia was as a captain. I never thought he was that leader. He was one of the leaders, but not the main leader. And the other thing I wanted to tell you is, in the good year of Lazio, Favalli in August was never in the team. Never. And then he was always playing. Lulic is that kind of player. And in the 3-5-2, he can play in a center midfield position. He can play on the left. He can play on the right. I think he's going to play a lot.
Yeah, I think he'll end the season with a lot of appearances. But I suppose more for the big games, for the derby games, for, semi-finals, finals, if we get that far, I can't see him being picked in the starting lineup when perhaps you could argue you need your captain most is for those big games. And he doesn't get in the team for me. But anything can happen, injuries. As soon as there's one injury in that midfield, he's probably the guy who's going to step in. So yeah, I mean, I'm happy. I'm very happy to have him as the Lazio captain. But I just thought it'd be something worth flagging up, perhaps.
Don't know. I wish he was Djordjevic, so we could sell him before September. But
well, let's not get on to Philip Djordjevic. We've got a few other kind of interesting questions which we'll finish up with here. And one is about Simone Inzaghi's position. This is from Adel Almaki, and he's basically asking how Simone is going to deal with the conflict of failing in the second season with Lazio as what's happened with the last three coaches before. This is something Lulic was asked about, and he basically just said, we've got to be better, we've got to be more focused and so on. And I think, but in my opinion, this is the second season problem has always just been a question of investment. It makes sense when you're playing just in the league and you have a good season and then you don't add to that squad. Of course you're not going to have as good a season because everyone's absolutely exhausted and you haven't got enough options to be able to give them more time. I think what Inzaghi's difference is here is that he's more willing to give time to the young players. So perhaps he will be able to keep his squad a bit fresher because he's able to actually give time to players, and he's already blooded them in Serie A, so it's going to make them more capable of actually getting results. So I do have a bit more faith in Inzaghi than perhaps in Pioli or Petkovic.
I agree. I think, again, Inzaghi will give more time to players like Murgia, Lombardi. So the important thing is the player Lazio would buy this summer. Marusic was a good signing for me. Lucas Leiva as well. Di Gennaro will come handy. Again, we're still missing someone in front. I think Lazio have to buy one or two players there, and that will make the difference. The biggest issue was that every time Lazio was playing in Europe, they didn't have enough players to compete in 3 different competitions. So I think this time maybe things are better. Still, we have to see what happens, but who's going to leave the club, etc. But I saw some improvement. Let's put it like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's just finish off with one final question again from Gerk Stav, who's been fantastic with his questions this week. So he's following on from that, asking what are the club's realistic ambitions for the next season, and what would be the minimum acceptable position to finish in Serie A. Do you want to go first on that?
This type of questions depends a lot even on the other teams. Lazio could say, okay, we build a team for the Champions League, but then you see the other teams, what they're doing. Milan have bought a lot of players. I don't think a lot of them are very good, but, Biglia, Kessi, etc., they are good players. So I wish Lazio could compete for the 4th place, for the Champions League place, but it's going to depend a lot on the other teams. So I think Lazio could be around that position, 5th or 6th, unfortunately. It depends on the last signing. But,
yeah, I think in terms of the minimum acceptable position, I think, Lazio kind of have to finish in the top 6 in order for people to be willing to accept it, don't they? If they're out of Europe, then people are just unhappy generally. But it also depends on how far we go in the Europa League, because if Lazio actually have a proper run at the Europa League and, reach the semi-final or the final, perhaps fans would be a bit more willing to accept a 7th place finish or so. I don't know if you agree, but say Lazio put more energy into actually trying to win it and bring back some, European glory days, reach the final, win it even, then perhaps you'd be happier to accept a lower league standing, but I don't think it's realistic to expect both. I don't think you can say with the depth of this Lazio squad that it's going to be possible to compete to win the Europa League and to compete to get in the Champions League. I think an early exit from the Europa League would actually be a good thing in terms of doing well in Serie A. What you have to remember about teams like Milan is it's going to take them a while to actually kind of get that team to gel, in my opinion. Roma don't look great. Juventus and Napoli are looking strong, but I think teams like Atalanta won't be as much of a force next season. So Lazio could easily be in the top four, but it depends on how far the European run goes, I think.
I think a little bit different from you. I think the performing well in Europe will give a boost to the team, even in Serie A. They will increase the confidence of the team, of the players. Instead, if you, for any reason, lose in the group stage of Europe League, you will have a problem that you will have a lot of players not having any more time to play because one competition is gone, and at the same time have less motivation because you're not in Europe anymore. So again, it's going to be important to see if the players in the bench are going to perform well and give the chance to make them perform in the Europe League and succeed. Again, I think Lazio can go far in the Europe League because the team is good, and I hope people like Murgia, Lombardi will make another step forward and increase their performance. And I think, and this is something that not a lot of people believe in Italy, that if you perform in Europe League, that's good even for the Serie A because it's going to give you more confidence and give more time to play for the other players who won't be upset. You have to have a good locker room, and that depends a lot on the players who don't play every Sunday. So I think Lazio should try to go and win the Europe League. I know it's not going to be easy, but that should be one of the targets. And not only the target you say to the newspaper, but really believe it in the locker room.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing, Vito. I don't know if you can, actually being Italian, give me more insight on this, but it just isn't a competition that seems important in Italy. It's just not regarded that seriously until that, perhaps you could say, has changed in recent seasons a little bit. But Lazio often have gone into it before and played a kind of second-string team throughout the group stage. Usually managed to get through anyway, but if you do finish second in the group because you've not taken it seriously enough, then straight away in the knockout rounds you're facing much bigger teams than you'd like to. So I think it's a European competition. It has to be taken seriously. Lazio, let's be realistic. Lazio aren't or haven't been a Champions League club for quite some time now. So this is a competition that Lazio, when they're in it, should be looking to win. And it doesn't seem to have been something that's been high on the list of importance in recent years.
I totally agree with you. I totally agree. And I give you one example. The only time the Lazio did well in Europe League, who was the manager? Petkovic. Every time an Italian manager, he didn't have any interest in the Europe League. Why? Because you play on Thursday night, so you arrive very late, and it's going to be difficult to prepare the Sunday night match in Serie A. So, for example, Reia or Pioli were often making the subs playing the Europe League. And again, I still believe some of the subs should play, but it should be 3-4, not the full team. You shouldn't change the full team for Europe League. And this is the difference. I think the mentality of the manager is fundamental. Because the player, they don't care. They want to win every time you get in the pitch. They want to perform, they want to win. You never play a match where you say, okay, I want to lose this one. No, I want to win. But if the manager tells me, okay, get in and try to not get injured because I don't care if we win or we lose, then probably the player won't perform well. Instead, with Petkovic, Lazio should even go on to the semi-final. The referee on the Turkish match was embarrassing. But anyway, Petkovic was making the top players perform in Europe League. with 2 or 3 subs. But even if you think Napoli, Napoli should have won the Europa League 2 years ago. Instead, they played really bad because the manager had no interest in that, while with Benitez was much different. So I think it's more due to the mentality of the Italian manager. But now things is changing.
Do you think that's...
Yep.
Yeah, do you think that's going to change because now there's a Champions League place on offer? Do you think that's going to change the Italian mentality about it?
Even because they found out that Europa League now gives more money than before, and that's going to be a big difference as well. So I hope Inzaghi knows this and will try to win the Europa League or go as far as possible.
Well, we're out of questions for today, but thanks very much to everyone who's been in touch throughout the week on Twitter, Facebook, and all the rest of it. So, it's been an exhausting show. There's been lots of talking points this week. But keep them coming next week. I'm sure there's going to be much more to talk about by the time next weekend rolls around.
And who knows, maybe Lazio's going to sell Keita, so we're going to talk about the new arrival there.
I wouldn't get your hopes up.
Anyway, as always, you can follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, on Spreaker, on YouTube. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. And for any Lazio questions, you know where to find us. Thank you, Alasdair. Enjoy your holiday.
Thank you very much. Ciao.
Ciao, ciao.